Hey everyone, RogueGold here. Welcome back to The Division 2, and today I'm delivering a story recap for you all. Now I know this is not my usual kind of content, and believe me, this one was hard enough to make, so I don't intend on making this a super regular thing. But as many of you know, I do enjoy following the game's story a lot. I've done plenty of videos discussing the latest revelations, sharing my theories for what's to come, and because of that, I've gotten tons of requests over time to do a larger story recap. There's plenty of people out there, whether they missed a big chunk of the game's updates or are jumping in for the first time, who want to follow that story and want to take part in these discussions, but they simply feel too out of the loop and don't feel as though the game provides the guidance or resources to get the kind of recap and catch up that they're seeking. So, that is my hope for today. I want to do my best to recap everything you need to know about the Division 2's current and ongoing main storyline, which for this video I'm dubbing the Sokolova War. This stretches back many years and seasons in the Division 2's content to get you caught up on everything that's gone down in relation to this arc, and should get your knowledge to where it needs to be as we head into year 6 for the game. 3 big disclaimers that I want to get out of the way as we jump in. Number 1, this recap covers everything up to the end of year 5 season 3 for the Division 2, aka the Vanguard season. That is the latest story content that is released at the time of me making this video. So if you're watching this in the future, just keep in mind whatever other seasons and events may have taken place since then. Number 2, the presentation of this recap is going to be chronologically in relation to how events played out in the Division's world and lore. However, it's also going to be told retroactively, meaning if we learn something big about a past event several seasons after it happened, I plan to include that relevant information at the time of covering that original incident. So hopefully that will allow for the information in this video to flow a bit better and be more digestible. And 3, my philosophy and goal with this video is to keep things extremely surface level and strictly need to know. Not only do we have some other fantastic lore channels and videos in the community that do extensive lore deep dives with the level of detail that some of you may crave, but doing a more top level recap much better aligns with my skill set, and I think there's a lot of you who just want those major important details without some of the nuance. And the other big thing that I have to do is shout out and send a major thank you to Hermes, an awesome member of the community here who I'm sure many of you know. I was not going to pull off a video like this on my own, and so he came in extremely clutch to cross-reference, research, and proofread much of the work done on this. So huge thanks to him. Please know that this video would not be here without his contributions. And my final thing to say, I know we're getting there, if you do end up enjoying the video and it helps you out with your comprehension of the story, leaving a like on here helps more than you know. And if you're not already and you want to see more Division coverage from myself, then I would immensely appreciate you clicking that subscribe button. And without further ado, let's get into this. Alright, now to begin this recap of the Sokolova War, we need to go far back in time within the Division's world and establish some key players and events prior to the green poison outbreak that kicked off the entire universe's stories in the original Division game. Beginning with the Division organization. The Strategic Homeland Division was an organization within the government kept entirely secret and recruited members on a purely precautionary basis, meaning the Division would only get activated in the event of a major domestic crisis. And while the commonly peddled narrative is that Division agents have complete and total jurisdiction and authorization to take whatever actions they deem necessary to protect America's people and assets, it is simultaneously true that the organization reports to one sole individual, the President, who has the legal power to command the organization on what to do and what actions to take, for better or worse. Now, switching gears, across the globe and long before the outbreak, Alexei Sokolov was the name of an affluent Russian industrialist. He had 2 children, Natalia and her half-brother Felix. One of Alexei's greatest life accomplishments was the founding and management of Sokolov Concern, a military equipment manufacturer. Many years later, after he had passed, his daughter Natalia took control of the company, and with the wealth of her family's empire, she became centrally involved with the creation of the Black Tusk Private Military Corporation. It's also important to note that her brother, Felix, was recruited into the Division sometime before the green poison outbreak. Speaking of which, we then skip ahead somewhat closer to the beginning of the Division story on that fateful Black Friday. Ortiz Robotics was a cutting-edge technology research and development company located in the US. Its 2 founders were husband and wife Alex and Claire Ortiz, and among their many creations, one of their most noteworthy and earlier endeavors was their experimentation and testing with artificial intelligence. After lots of time and money spent testing and refining, the couple had come up with 2 main products. Anna, or the Advanced Neural Network Algorithm, was was Claire's project. Anna was an AI system that had passed the Turing test, meaning those interacting with her under the right conditions would be unable to differentiate her from a real person, and with advanced levels of personality and wit, she could serve as a cunning field companion to military operators or for other practical uses. Meanwhile, Isaac, or the Intelligence System Analytic Computer, was Alex's product. Isaac served a similar goal of being a highly advanced field and network infiltration tool. However, Isaac was notably far less humanistic than Anna. His decision-making was binary, judging between right and wrong with a firm line, and he acted less as a personified companion and much more as a watchful guidance system. Sometime later into Ortiz's tenure, Alex and Claire prepare a pitch for two very high-profile clientele, the aforementioned Natalia Sokolova and Calvin McManus. Calvin, or Cal, is the currently serving Director of Homeland Security for the US government, a department which is notably in control of the recruitment, management, and operations for the division. At the time of this pitch meeting, Cal and Natalia are already familiar with one another thanks to their reputable statuses in each country, but clearly they represent separate interests on the world stage. The pitch in question is that of the AI technology Ortiz has been developing, with them primarily touting the advanced surveillance capabilities that it would provide to the US government and the Black Tusk. There is a lot of back and forth in this section of the lore with many developments and revelations along the way, but ultimately this is where things end up. Probably a few years later, Cal has bought into the design for Isaac. Everyone found Anna to be too intelligent and too off-putting that Claire was forced to shelve her code for a later day. Cal initially implemented Isaac into the NSA branch of the government for enhanced surveillance of potential domestic and foreign threats, which among other things led him to being briefed on Gordon Amherst, the eventual creation of the green poison and the architect of the Division World's apocalypse. Despite warnings of Amherst's research into biological contagions, Cal continually shrugged it off. Whether or not this came down simply to negligence, or perhaps he had darker motives for not dealing with Amherst when he could have, is unclear, but later it dawned on him to begin implementing Isaac for more practical uses as well, notably as the central AI power and voice behind Division agents should they ever need to be activated and be out in the field. There was one very notable event and decision made in the process to developing Isaac for agent usage, and this was in the Rogue Protocol. Were an agent to go off mission and disobey the organization's central purpose, as well as any of the president's directed orders, then agents would lose access to their Isaac connection and their SHD tech, and their watch would turn red as an easy signifier for other agents to see. The problem that Ortiz and Cal came across was that due to Isaac's limited scope of nuance, the system would flag agents rogue for trivial matters such as breaking into a drugstore for medical supplies while out in the field, leaving them stranded without their AI's help and their tech. A revision was therefore created with one big contingency plan. Rogues could now retain access to their full division agent capabilities, but in the event that a rogue was truly off mission and not just flagged for a simple offense, a hunter could be dispatched to eliminate the threat. Hunters are a top secret group that report directly to Calvin McManus. The majority we've unmasked thus far being division agents themselves, potential recruits are scrupulously vetted, tested, and must gain Homeland's trust in order to be brought into the hunter program. For those who are division agents, this secondary identity as a hunter is kept entirely to themselves, and for the duration of their missions as hunters, they leave behind any markings or traces labeling them as an agent. This includes wearing customized ballistic masks as well as taking other identity concealing measures, and once they receive their assignment, they go out to eliminate the rogue threat. Cal's collaboration with Ortiz Robotics and the development of Isaac subsequently led to the creation of the infrastructure for the SHD network, ultimately serving as the network connecting division agents to Isaac and their tech no matter where the mission takes them. This includes 3 SHD cores, one in South Dakota, Kansas, and Texas. These are vast, hidden underground complexes serving as the heart for division agents' network connection regardless where in the country they may be located. Most major metropolitan areas within the US also contained a shade node, essentially a centered database to ensure smooth Isaac connection across the country. And lastly, with large thanks to Ortiz's research and design, the mobile shade servers. These serve as the last line of defense for an agent's connection to the shade network, primarily being used to offer connection in rural areas of the country, but additionally can be transported around for localized coverage and connection. On the flip side, you have Natalia's dealings with Ortiz. She turned down their initial pitches for the AI as she wanted something a bit more specialized for the Black Tusk. This led to the creation of Diamond, an AI program with no dedicated voice to communicate with its operators. Rather, it sends a raw data stream to the user to allow them to make the best choices for themselves out in combat. Diamond is the central network that all of Black Tusk's technology, like Warhounds as well as its operations, are run off of, and similar to Division Agents' watches, each Black Tusk unit has a small diamond transmitter piece connecting them to the network. In the background to all of these developments between Natalia and Cal, however, is the discovery of the back door. What Alex and Claire realize is that in the midst of the development for Isaac, Anna, and Diamond, their design has created a back door, meaning that if a user has a connection to any one of the three systems, they can, if knowledgeable enough, establish a connection to any of the other two, accessing all of their thought to be protected data, communications, etc. And in theory, this can be weaponized to temporarily or permanently shut down these opposing systems. Claire and Alex debate on whether to fix the issue or to lean into it as a potential failsafe should one of the systems and its controller begin to be used for unsavory purposes. And so because of their founding and allegiance to the United States and Claire's distrust of Natalia specifically, they decide to let Cal and Homeland in on the secret of this backdoor's existence, which for now they decide to keep Natalia in the dark about despite her investment into Diamond, meaning the entirety of the Black Tusk's infrastructure is equally as susceptible to the same backdoor infiltration. Alright, now with all of that background context down, let's move on to the story within the Division 2 itself, which is where this arc really kicked off. Now, the majority of relevant information to go over happened well after the game's launch and when things transitioned into the seasonal model and storytelling, but there are a few notable things to mention from the original campaign and the release of the game, so let's cover that. Timeline-wise, the Division 2 takes place 6 to 7 months after the events of the first game, in the summer following the Green Poison outbreak. First important note, the True Sons faction. This was one of the main new factions introduced upon our arrival to Washington, D.C., their MO being to use their stored firepower and paramilitary experience to dominate the region and spread their fascist ideologies. At the time of their introduction, they were led by General Antoine Ridgway, who we disposed of during the game's original campaign. This then leaves a power vacuum within the faction, one which we'll return to later. Also related to the True Sons, the Castle Settlement. This was one of the 3 settlements that Division agents were in connection with across DC during the Division 2's campaign, before the True Sons bombed it using the hazardous DC-62 chemical compound. This killed many and left the area poisoned and unusable. Again, more on the castle later. Then there's the matter of the president. At the time of the Green Poison outbreak, Lawrence Waller is the POTUS, but after invoking Directive 51 and activating the division, he dies of a heart attack. This then leads to Vice President Thomas Mendez to be sworn in, but after a short possession of the title, he dies in what's made to look like a suicide. After the fact, however, it's discovered that this apparent suicide was actually staged, and in actuality he was murdered by 2 Black Tusk operatives posing as Secret Service agents. Why the Black Tusk would do this? Well, Natalia Sokolova had interest in imposing her own POTUS. That being next up in the line of succession, Speaker of the House Andrew Ellis. From the moment of his introduction, Ellis had been in Natalia's pockets. This includes our rescue of him from hyena forces during the campaign. This was staged by the Black Tusk and Natalia, and eventually once we do learn of his treason, the Black Tusk whisk him away and put him under their protection. The head of that operation, as well as the majority of the Black Tusk's dealings in DC after their invasion, is Barden Schaefer. Schaefer is in charge of a specialized sect of the Greater Black Tusk organization, that being the BTSU, or Black Tusk Special Unit. He's described as a patriot and is highly trusted by Natalia to carry out the Black Tusk's interest, and through coordination with key lieutenants such as Mila Wyvern Raddick, Ellis Galveston, Petrus Brenner, Elijah Sumner, and Jack Bonney, he and the BTSU carry out many operations that we push back on throughout the Division 2's early content. More on Schaefer in this thread later. With those important details down, we now move on towards the events of Warlords of New York, where the true heart of this storyline kicked off. There are some things that went on in the background leading up to the events of Warlords, however, so let's cover those. Aaron Keener is likely a name familiar to many of you. In many ways, he was the poster child for the entire movement of rogue agents back when some of the first agents to be activated began to disavow their division objectives. He historically turned on the organization after theirs and the JTF's mishandling of the withdrawal from the Dark Zone in Midtown Manhattan. And after our dealings with him in the Division 1, it included him kidnapping and escaping with virologist Vitaly Chernenko along with Gordon Amherst's virus printer. What we didn't know for many years following this was why. Keener's ideology had always been that the division is not the answer to the restoration of society, but what was incorrectly assumed was that that meant that the division was his enemy, when in reality he had uncovered that its leadership was the true threat. At some point after the events of the Division 1, Keener uncovered much of the larger conspiracy happening behind the scenes. The fact that Natalia Sokolova had orchestrated an overtaking of the US government, a notion of her larger plans for the country and the world, more on this later, as well as her relationship and partnership with Calvin McManus, who, like we covered, has direct ties and a degree of control over the division, and is also in the line of succession for the presidency, albeit much farther down the list. And lastly, Keener uncovered the truth about the Hunters, and how if not taken care of, they'd prove to be an unstoppable asset for Cal and Natalia to carry out their plans. These discoveries shifted his entire mindset and goals. In his mind, saving what remains and setting the country back on track to a true revitalization now meant eliminating the Hunters, the Black Tusk, Cal, and Natalia at any cost. Sometime prior to the events of Warlords of New York, he determined that it was imperative for him to meet up with and pitch Faye Lau of this mission. Faye, of course, being one of the division's most loyal agents and our primary coordinator during the Division 1. She's not one to turn on her morals or beliefs lightly, and that should indicate the severity and scale of the threat that Keener outlined to her. Because after much convincing, Faye agreed to set aside their differences and collude with Keener to try and figure out how they could possibly take on this threat, despite being outmanned, outgunned, and outmatched in nearly every way. Faye also notably took on a call sign of Cassandra during this time, as she was still a division agent when this partnership began. This then leads us to our involvement with Warlords of New York, which takes place sometime in August following the Division 2's main campaign summertime setting. Again, much of what I'm about to explain we did not know at the time, but the full picture has come into focus over the years. Faye calls to agents in DC for backup after an attack by Keener on Manhattan City Hall. He did this using his new Eclipse virus, engineered by the aforementioned Vitaly Chernenko. On the outside, this was meant to look like an unprompted and dirty attack on the division in the JTF. And it is highly noteworthy to mention that he made this move without consulting Faye, causing her to nearly abandon his cause and revoke their partnership. But it's implied that this attack was targeted at division agents within City Hall who he believed were Hunters, and moreover, as a test and showing of his new Eclipse tool, which he hoped to use in the conflicts to come with Cal and Nat. We, of course, respond to this call for aid, and from there begin our manhunt for Keener and his 4 rogue agent lieutenants across lower Manhattan. The most important of these lieutenants is Theo Parnell. Theo is the son of deceased Senator Henry Parnell, who he eventually learns died at the orders of Natalia Sokolova, this being the driving motivator for him to join Keener and his secret crusade. He originally discovers this thanks to his advanced hacking and tech skills, which also lend directly into his work on decoy technology, and his research into tampering with Isaac's analytical systems. All of this culminates in a grand plan that he, Keener, Faye, and others in their cause devise. Due to increasing scrutiny from the Black Tusk and the inevitable heat that the division will bring down on him due to his past actions, Keener decides that he and Theo need to disappear from the grid in order to effectively continue fighting the Hunters, Homeland, and Natalia from the shadows. The first step of this plan and their overall test to assure its efficacy take place when agents track Theo down and engage him in Lower Manhattan's Civic Center region. We first witness a demonstration of Isaac's inaccuracy when Theo is able to trick us into thinking a deceased JTF officer is indeed Theo, and Isaac relays that information to us. That was only the start of the deception, however, as we continue to chase Theo through the facility. Eventually, we overhear comms between he and Keener, in which it is made to sound like Theo is desperately calling for extraction, yet Keener coldly declines, essentially stating that Theo is no longer of use to him anymore. After this, we corner Theo and seemingly take him down, confirmed by Isaac when he declares him deceased. This turned out not to be the case, however. Keener's supposed abandonment was staged, in an attempt to convince us agents and any eavesdropping Black Tusk that the two had no further allegiances or extended plans. Additionally, we did not kill Theo. Through the usage of decoy tech and the previously displayed ability to tamper with Isaac's sensors, Theo was able to fake his wounds and deceive us and the world into believing he's dead. And once we accept this and move on, he's then free to begin preparing the same trick for Keener himself. Keener's location is eventually pinpointed to Liberty Island, at which point he makes his presence and his threat very clear. By aiming an Eclipse payload missile at Manhattan, he draws extreme levels of attention from both the Division and the Black Tusk, leading to an all-out assault from Black Tusk on the island, and a scramble to see who can get him first. Barton Schaefer is in charge of this assault and is notably infuriated over their failure to penetrate Keener's defenses, but by capitalizing on their efforts, us agents are finally able to make it to him and the missile, and after a tough battle, we stop the missile from launching and wiping out Manhattan, and are once again led to believe that we've taken out another rogue agent. Except we have not, and thanks to Theo's engineering, Keener fakes his demise. Before leaving Liberty Island, we take Keener's watch with us, but after that point, he's now free to continue his fight against the real threat without the risk of drawing unwanted attention to himself. In the aftermath of all of this, Faye publicly goes rogue, disavowing the division while also joining the ranks of the Black Tusk. Again, from the outside this looks bad, but in hindsight we know that it was to be able to gain access to the Black Tusk organization from the inside and hopefully score some leverage for the conflicts to come, and she begins this by starting to build a familiarity with Barton Schaefer. After this, the game transitioned to its seasonal model of updates and storytelling. The first 2 seasons cover events that are mostly unimportant to this arc, so for now we skip over those. But that brings us to Season 3, Concealed Agenda, which takes place on and around August 27th. The prime target of this manhunt is the one and only Barton Schaefer. The background of this season is that Faye is continuing to rise within the ranks of the Black Tusk, causing her to gain Natalia's attention, and in order to test Faye's loyalty and leadership ability, she puts Faye in charge of another high-ranking BTSU member who Natalia is beginning to have doubts about, Schaefer. Faye proceeds to connect Schaefer with 4 rogue agents across Washington, D.C. and New York for the purposes of building trade networks, forging new alliances for the Black Tusk, etc. The one noteworthy lieutenant of this manhunt was Lynette Dusk Edwards, who despite being a rogue is not affiliated with Keener's network and ideology, but rather leads a faction within the True Sons who are continuing to uphold Ridgway's ideals. More on this in a moment. Schaefer carries out the assignment and makes contact with each of them, but begins to feel short-handed as he's too spread out to try and maintain each of these connections. Therefore, he goes to Natalia directly to request additional support, but due to her ongoing suspicions with him, she decides to go in a different direction. She reaches out to Calvin McManus to ask for the usage of a hunter that can not only supervise and assess the intentions behind the various rogues that the Black Tusk is now in contact with, but also to keep tabs on Schaefer and determine if he's truly still on mission. So, between our own objectives of neutralizing these rogues and the Hunter's usual murderistic tendencies, one by one we go around and the rogues drop like flies. Circling back to Dusk, her demise was noteworthy because of her ties to the True Sons. Regardless of if we or the Hunter were actually responsible, the True Sons blamed the Black Tusk for her death, dissolving any partnership that the two factions had. This will become important later. Moving toward our confrontation with Schaefer, there's one essential element happening in the background, and that is Schaefer's recruitment to the cause that Faye is a part of alongside Keener. His patriotic persona and past squabbles with Natalia on her direction of the Black Tusk made him a seemingly easy target to buy into the idea of her and Cal being the true threat to the nation, and his position as one of the highest-ranking BTSU members also makes him a valuable asset to Faye and Keener's cause. So, while we never see or hear exactly what went down to flip him, by the time we track Schaefer down to Coney Island, he has already joined Faye's side, and it's quite possible that by that time Natalia had figured this out herself, as that same hunter has followed him to Coney. And what we learn heading into this conflict is that Schaefer himself wasn't sure if its target was the division, someone else, or himself. Us agents arrive on the scene, dispatch of the guards and the hunter, before finally engaging with Schaefer. Once again, unbeknownst to us at the time, this was all a part of the plan. Faye orchestrated things with Schaefer so that the division would take him alive and therefore be able to use his expertise and knowledge to gain the upper hand in the fight to come. What was not accounted for was how forceful we might be, as the result of that fight was that Schaefer got knocked into a coma. However, we did take him alive, not yet knowing Faye's greater plan, but with the asset in hand. This takes us to Season 4, End of Watch, which took place on and around August 30th, and continuing on our warpath, our prime target this time around was Faye Lau. Behind the scenes, Faye had a very clear, albeit high-risk mission, and so despite her dedication and trust of the division and her friends in New York, she took 0 chances and let no one in on her plan. The only people who did know were presumably Keener, who was still out of the picture at this point, as well as Barton Schaefer, who we overhear a conversation between the two of them in which she explicitly instructs him not to tell the division about their alliance or her plans after his capture until she's made her move. Obviously, this was not accounting for the fact that he'd be comatose, but it goes to show her dedication to seeing this through. And that plan was to take out the President of the United States, one Andrew Ellis, who, as previously covered, was only sworn in thanks to Natalia's ordered assassination of previous VP Mendez. Faye's exact reasoning for this is never explicitly stated, but there are several factors that clearly benefit her in Keener's cause. For one, as previously established, the president holds sole authority over the division, meaning a corrupt figure in that seat could at any time order them to ally with the Black Tusk, or far worse, the president could use their influence to instate the Black Tusk as a legitimate power, further clearing the path for Natalia's plans. And perhaps most frighteningly, the president holds access to the country's nuclear arsenal. And as we learn later on, Ellis was continually pressured by Natalia to keep the button close by. Again, we'll cover Natalia's greater plans in more detail soon. So, in order for Faye to enact this plan, she begins work on setting up a meeting between herself and the Black Tusk protected president at Camp White Oak. This of course only being possible because she's now a part of the Black Tusk herself. Prior to this meeting, however, is a lot of required groundwork to ensure its security and other preparations, and for this she employs the help of another 4 rogue agents. This time around, a few notable names. One is Felix Sokolov, that's right, Natalia's half-brother. Now, while it's not overly pivotal, I do think it's important to briefly touch on their family dynamic. The two of them didn't grow up very close, as Felix was sent to America while Nat stayed either in Russia or was at boarding school. And we also learn later on that her relationship with her father was seemingly not that loving either. Despite the distance, however, you'd imagine that she still feels a degree of responsibility and care for her younger sibling, but perhaps this was part of the problem. In one of President Ellis's notes, it stated that her brother was one of the only things standing in Natalia's way, and so many believe that her putting him in danger by allowing Faye to use him for her operation was the path of least resistance and guilt for Natalia to remove that one last emotional tie that she had, so that moving forward she can continue to act solely with her objectives in mind and with no leverage against her. And once we did eliminate Felix, it garnered no notable reaction from Natalia. Another rogue this season was Bridget Viper Douglas, who has a few noteworthy details to point out about her. For one, she was actually in on Keener and Faye's plot as well, being one of the people that Keener entrusted to try and begin coercing Faye to join. And from this connection, it was also implied that the two had a relationship for a time. Additionally, we also learned that she was a hunter, which backs up a threat that Calvin McManus had made to Natalia, that being that he has operatives embedded within the Black Tusk. Who knows how many more there could be besides Viper? Eventually, however, the meeting between Faye and the president does go down, but just before our agents are able to reach the scene, Faye does indeed eliminate Ellis. She kills the president. Afterwards, presumably still trying to keep her cover, she radios the remaining Black Tusk forces, pinning the president's death on our hands, and attempts to flee via a Black Tusk helicopter. Due to us not being aware of her plan or true allegiances, however, we pursue and do ultimately take out Faye. It's only afterwards, when we begin to hear a few apology recordings that she's left for Paul Rhodes and Roy Benitez, that we begin to understand what we've done and what she was really trying to do. In the aftermath of the battle, Kelso, who while I haven't mentioned as of yet, is a noteworthy character introduced in the Division 2. She was our main Division agent ally in the game's base campaign in DC, and during Warlords of New York, she traveled with us to fight Keener, at that time becoming close with Faye and the rest of the New York crew. She visits the battlefield where Faye died and takes her watch, and leaves with a rage as for why Faye would betray her friends like this. This sends us into Season 9, just ignore the weird numerical jump from 4 to 9 there, titled Hidden Alliance. This took place on and around September 30th, and the context for this one begins to center around the True Sons faction, hence all of the little bits we've spoken on regarding them so far. Since the death of Ridgway back during the summer, a new leader has emerged and stepped in to fill his shoes, that being General Peter Anderson. Not too much you need to know about him other than that he's very status driven. He cares a lot about how others perceive him, even when reality or his own actions don't back that up. But also, his philosophy when it comes to the True Sons is that Ridgway had a narrow vision, and Anderson now wants to expand their operations and influence possibly nationwide. At the beginning of the season, we learn that Anderson has sent a strike team into DC for yet unknown purposes. This team is led by Captain Lewis, another True Sons member, and this is our prime target for this season. It's notable that Lewis used to be in the JTF, and he had an old friendship with Manny Ortega, our primary division operations coordinator that you meet right at the start of the Division 2. We spend the season going around taking out Lewis's forces and learning some cryptic clues over time about what might be going on, before we finally track Lewis down to the Jefferson Trade Center. It's revealed that Anderson and the True Sons at large are investigating connections between the Hunters and the Black Tusk, likely tipped off after the dissolution of their previous partnership from Season 3. And so now they've caught wind of the same conspiracy that Faye, Keener, and others have been tied up in. When our agent arrives to the Jefferson Trade Center, however, we find that Lewis's entire team has already been wiped out, and only he remains defenseless and unwilling to fight. What happens is that the True Sons unknowingly walked in on a recruitment test. A recruitment for what? For the Hunter program. After we killed the Hunter that was going after Schaefer on Coney Island, Calvin McManus requested that Natalia present him with viable candidates for a replacement. And while at the time she offered her own brother as one option, Cal ultimately went with Jack Bonney, one of the last surviving BTSU members from Schaefer's original strike team earlier on in the game's story. So, Black Tusk have set up within the Trade Center to facilitate Bonney's test and to see if he's got what it takes. Meanwhile, the entire operation is being watched over by the Recruiter, a mysterious hunter that Lewis warns us about, and one that we'll come to know much better over time. So, we decide not to kill Lewis, and while he defends the local shade node situated within the facility, we go in and try and shut down this test, and to learn what's really going on. We eventually take out the Black Tusk forces, the Recruiter gets away, but we do confront and eliminate Jack Bonney, who, interestingly, has a smartwatch on him, and once killed, Isaac reads out Agent Jack Bonney, status classified. During the mayhem, Lewis does get away, but we part ways with him being tentatively on our side as opposed to adversarial. Upon completing the manhunt, we do track down some further comms left behind by Fei Lao, and both our agent and Kelso begin to learn of her true intentions and the greater conspiracy brewing behind the scenes. After this, we move on to Season 10, Price of Power, taking place on and around October 1st. Our prime target this time around is now General Anderson, as we catch wind that he's attempting to broker a new deal and partnership between the True Sons and the Black Tusk. Why would he do this, especially after the events of Season 3 and the incident that just went down at Jefferson Trade Center? Well, as covered, his words often don't match up to his fortitude, and after learning what he's learned and surveying his options, Anderson has concluded that Natalia and the Black Tusk have the greatest chance of coming out on top of this entire conflict, and he sees the best path forward for the True Sons' survival and expansion being at her side. One person who disagrees with this plan, however, is Captain Lewis, and after recent efforts made by the True Sons to reclaim and resume operations at the Penco Fairview nuclear power plant, Lewis puts his own plan into motion to defect and to bring with him many other True Sons members who don't agree with Anderson's vision. This goes awry, however, and Black Tusk forces at the facility capture both he and many other defectors. Division agents are then dispatched to the power plant, and while many of the defectors were imprisoned or killed, we are able to save Lewis as well as Wally, another True Son. But Anderson, who was on site, gets away thanks to a Black Tusk hovercraft that's sent in, and after finally meeting Natalia Sokolova in person, he finalizes an alliance between the two factions. The outcome of this season is that our enemies have now grown stronger, the power plant is presumably under their control, offering greater utility to their operations, but on the plus side, we gain some new True Sons allies who have now returned with us and the JTF to DC. Next up is Season 11, Reign of Fire. This one takes place on and around October 15th. Now, this season is quite pivotal. It has a lot of relevant information and events that take place before, during, and after it, so let me do my best to wade through it all here in a concise manner. Word begins spreading about a division operation that has gone down in St. Louis, Missouri. And side note, if you want to hear more about this event, then you should absolutely check out the Division Recruited novel. I'll leave a link for it down in the description. The aftermath of it, however, is the fact that dirty bombs were used against the division and the city. This leads to characters on every side of this conflict having a growing anxiety and that gnawing thought in the back of their head. Is that what this is going to come to in DC? Are we going down that path? Heading into this season, we also see the beginning of the restoration of the Castle Settlement. That's right, the one that got bombed and decommissioned by the True Sons months back. Thanks to help from Lewis and Wally, who's an ex-engineer with an affinity for tech and networking, as well as several allies that we've gained over time who we'll cover soon, their combined efforts begin to move the needle on bringing the castle back to full strength. Moving into the actual events of this season, however, bolstered by the support of the True Sons, Natalia and the Black Tusk are now on the offensive. And to lead that operation in DC is Stovepipe, a Black Tusk operative and explosives expert. This leads to a variety of joint Black Tusk and True Sons operations across the DC area to prep their offensive, and during this time we also learn that our enemies are surveying the White House. They're aware that we took Barton Schaefer after the battle at Coney Island, and while they're unsure what condition he's in or how we're treating him, Natalia wants him back, dead or alive. He's too much of a liability to allow her enemies to have him. Eventually, after shutting down enough of the enemy forces, we piece together that Natalia has a plan in motion to use the same dirty bombs from St. Louis to take control of shipping lanes up at Coney Island. Us agents set out to go and stop him, but while en route and as we arrive on site, we overhear through the comms that Stovepipe is quite upset over Natalia lying to him about her not intending to use dirty bombs prior, yet now is asking him to use them here. He requests to get reassigned, Natalia grants his wish, saying she's sending a replacement, but when we finally make it to Stovepipe's last noted location, we find a lifeless body. Natalia doesn't accept the weakness, and Stovepipe's unwillingness to follow her command led to his swift demise. What we also learn, however, is that this entire operation at Coney Island was a trap, because while there, we get word from DC that the White House is under attack. We scramble to get airborne, fighting through hordes of Black Tusk robotics, but by the time we're on our way, much of the damage has already been done. Natalia and the Black Tusk make use of an experimental countermeasure to cripple the local shade network in DC. This ties into that backdoor that we discussed much earlier in Ortiz Robotics' design of the various AI systems. And again, if you want more info here, I highly suggest you check out the Recruited novel I linked below and its two sequels. The use of this countermeasure, however, has significantly reduced the Division and the JTF's ability to defend the base. and by the time we arrive, the walls have been breached. We find the recently recruited Captain Lewis to be dead, and Echo reveals that he was taken out by a hunter, and many key JTF personnel who were involved with the castle restoration were kidnapped by the Black Tusk during the chaos around the city. The silver lining of the attack is that the Black Tusk failed to achieve one of their central goals, reclaiming Schaefer, because while he is still in a coma, the division and the JTF were able to hide him within a secret safe room in the basement of the White House. The fallout of this attack and season was pretty major. Afterwards, Natalia leaves us a chilling message that much more clearly defines her objective. She wants power and control. That has been her motivation since long before Gordon Amherst and the green poison were ever a thing, but in many ways the apocalypse cleared the path for her. And despite any setbacks that she's had, she remains committed to becoming the sole power leading over the United States and eventually the world. And the methods that she's willing to use to get there seem to have no bounds. That includes using nuclear bombs, as outlined in this season and like we previously covered with President Ellis's nukes, and plenty of other dirty tricks. The other noteworthy detail from the end of this season is that due to the Black Tusk's attack on the Shade Network, communication with New York has been lost. And so in order to check in on their status and to see if the network outage extended that far north, Agent Kelso decides to leave DC and head up that way. Alright, now with that down, we move on to Year 5 Season 1. Again, naming switch, don't worry about it. But this season is titled Broken Wings, taking place on and around October 16th. The premise is pretty simple. Everyone is still reeling from the attack on the White House, but most pressingly, we've got those hostages out there being held by the Black Tusk. And for now, we've got leads on 5 of them. The most important one being Mari Singh, who as it turns out is in a relationship with Manny Ortega, the aforementioned Division Op coordinator, and she's pregnant, so Manny truly feels the weight of this entire ordeal. A big theme of this season, I would say, is optics. We know that the Black Tusk just attacked the JTF and the White House, but how does the rest of the city, or even the country, see them? How do they view the division? And we see this play out when we go around rescuing these different hostages. Each one, in some form or another, report that their captivity was painless. The Black Tusk kept them nourished and rested, treated them with respect, and tried to articulate their expertise on various projects. And while those specific people know the atrocities that Natalia has committed, it does bring into question how others might react to the Black Tusk's presence. And all of this plays right into Natalia's grand plan. She will have nothing left to rule over if the entire country despises her. But if she can make them love her and think that the division is the enemy, that could be powerful. And we see this when we finally reach the Manning National Zoo to rescue Mari. A group of civilians is being evacuated by the Black Tusk, and over the comms we hear them convey genuine fright that the division is on site and causing mayhem. So, like I said, it's interesting to look at the different perspectives. We do finally catch up to Mari, who's been at a birthing clinic set up at the zoo, but just before reaching her location, we hear an unknown person hand her off a division earpiece and tell her to hide and wait for rescue. Almost as if they wanted us to get Mari back. And at the end of the op, when Mari's safe, we do briefly see the same recruiter Hunter back from the Trade Center watching from afar. Upon safely returning Mari to the castle, we see a cutscene of Natalia, who is suspiciously watching a live feed from the castle on a drone, and she's told that the asset is in place and awaiting orders. This carries us directly into Year 5 Season 2, titled Puppeteers, taking place on and around October 18th. The setup is rather simple. We're setting out to rescue the remaining JTF members still held hostage, but we're also now directly on the tail of the recruiter, who is said to be coordinating the hostage efforts in DC. Some other important events also happen as the season kicks off. For one, Division Agent Brian Johnson radios Manny about his return to DC and how he's willing and ready to help us out. Now, while not overly relevant prior to this, Brian was a central division agent used in much of the Division 2's main marketing, going around with his team of Heather Ward and Caleb Dunn reclaiming the city and pushing back the enemy factions. However, since the game's launch, we hadn't heard much of him or his team until now. Also, the beginning of this season sees the mobile Shade server that we have at the castle begin to act up, which is important because the network stability after the usage of the countermeasure at the White House is still in flux. We see Wally and even Brian attempt to fix it, but the problems persist. In the meantime though, with Brian's help, we go around locating and rescuing the remaining JTF captives, until we get to one final objective: to go and rescue Birdie from Camp White Oak. Now, quick side note, Birdie and Vikram Malik, who was another hostage that we saved this season, are siblings. Vic has been around in the story since the game's launch, but up until now he was mostly an untrustworthy snake, which sounds harsh, but it really isn't. The two of them are important because of their statuses prior to the green poison. Vic founded Odeya Technology. He had defense contracts with Calvin McManus and the larger US government, and prior to him appearing at the castle to help us out, he was held against his will and forced by Natalia Sokolova to develop renewable energy sources, both for her to be able to charge up her warhounds and power different sectors of the Black Tusk's infrastructure and operations. His sister Birdie, on the other hand, is potentially on an even higher level of genius. She has undiagnosed autism, and prior to the outbreak, she worked with Ortiz Robotics and directly with Claire Ortiz to work on many of the patents and designs they created, including many of Natalia's own personal projects. And as it turns out, she wasn't even knowingly a hostage at White Oak. Rather, she had just continued fixing Natalia's problems, as Natalia herself had told her that the Black Tusk and the Division were now working together. Nevertheless, we head out to Camp White Oak, notably with the mobile shade server in hand as per Agent Johnson's request, and we receive word that the recruiter is on site here as well. A lot goes down here. We rescue Birdie, who again was quite surprised to see us, not knowing that she was working for the enemy. But the big reveal is that Division Agent Brian Johnson is in fact the recruiter, and has been all along. While we're fighting the Black Tusk, he swipes the mobile shade server on site, causing our connection to the shade network to pop in and out, and we receive word that he's attempting to escape and drop the server right into Natalia's lap. It's notable that during our pursuit, Johnson claims that the only Division agents still left on mission are those loyal to Calvin McManus, and that if we want to be on the right side of history, we'll do so as well. But finally, we catch up to him locking into a tough battle, and one that feels much like a stalemate as ourselves and Johnson both run off of the same network and we have access to the same tools. It's only once Birdie enacts the countermeasure to deactivate the shade network for a brief period of time that we're able to lure Johnson into mortar fire and defeat him once and for all. We reclaim the server, take Birdie, and head back towards DC, and it's upon our return to the castle that Birdie fills Manny in on some key details that she learned during her time in captivity. For one, she's seen plans mocked up by Natalia for an underground city, one able to withstand and sustain a population for the duration of a nuclear winter. This of course calling back to her threats and pressuring President Ellis to use the button. Additionally, Birdie has been to the Black Tusk's headquarters, and while its security is top-notch, she notes that it has an advanced biometric detection system, only accessible by key Black Tusk Special Unit members. This causes Manny to realize that they have one of the only surviving members of that ranking, Barton Schaefer, and it's possible that he might be the key that they need. The other major fallout from the season's ending is the question, with the revelation that Brian Johnson was the recruiter all along, how can any of the Division be trusted? How do you know who's possibly a hunter and who's not? And Manny is called out on this right away. We now are going to take a brief detour from the seasonal track here to outline one notable event that went down around the same time as the Puppeteer season, and that was the cleaners' assault on the Merritt estate. Some brief context here, the Murray family were very wealthy, and after the death of her parents, the heiress Mackenzie built out a high-end clothing line in their family name. The Murray brand can be seen as far back as the earliest iterations and zones of the Division 1. The relevance here is that Mackenzie, who also goes by Mac or Eminem, met and had a rapport with several noteworthy characters. This including a somewhat friendship with Natalia Sokolova, a definite friendship with Bridget Douglas, as well as her catching Aaron Keener's eye at a benefit, although she declines his advances. All of this happening well before the green poison outbreak. Mackenzie survived the pandemic and established a settlement out of their family's countryside estate, and despite invitations from Bridget to leave and join the Black Tusk, Mac declined, in large part due to her and Natalia's strained relationship. She even contacted Natalia after Felix's death to pass along her condolences, but after hearing little remorse over it, she accused her of intentionally killing her brother. All of this leads to the timeline of the Puppeteer season. After months of peace at Mac's estate, Natalia decides that she's no longer comfortable with her former friend being out in the wild. So, she orchestrates an elaborate plan. She uses one of her operatives, Wright the Hellfire, to use his connections with some cleaners he knows to convince them to attack the estate, and in order to do so, he emboldens them with some shade tech provided by Calvin McManus. Natalia's orders are simple: wipe out the estate but bring Mackenzie in alive. The attack is ultimately thwarted by us, the Division. The estate does fall, but Eminem is brought back to New York's Haven settlement safely. Why Natalia would go to such lengths and spend so many resources just to get Eminem into her custody is unknown for now, but Mackenzie is sure to play an important role in the story to come, especially given her past connections. This then leads us into Year 5, Season 3, titled Vanguard. It takes place on an undisclosed date but shortly after the previous Puppeteer season finale, and thanks to the events at White Oak and the reveal about the recruiter, we decide it's time to follow up on our longtime Division ally, Alani Kelso, who, if you'll recall, headed off to New York just after the White House attack and hasn't returned since. We arrive in New York, but only to find that Kelso is gone missing, and it's now our job to try and follow any leftover clues to track her down. This plays right into this season's theme of mistrust. We've known Kelso for a long time and accomplished a lot together, but with her mysteriously disappearing, can we be fully sure that she's on our side? Shortly after our arrival, we access a CCTV recording from the Haven settlement, in which we see Kelso settling in after her trip, only to receive a message off of Faye Lau's Shade Watch. Again, keep in mind that Kelso took Faye's watch after her death at White Oak, and now this is its first time returning to New York since. The message is from Anna, that's right, the alternative AI developed by Claire Ortiz. And something important to note is that back during Warlords of New York, Theo Parnell was able to dig up the source code for Anna that Claire had stowed away. And while he implemented it into its own rogue network, one that was shared on a limited and local basis with people like Keener and evidently Faye, the message is left for Cassandra, Faye's call sign, stating that Vanguard has left her a present nearby. Now, Vanguard, which is also the title for the season, is Aaron Keener's call sign. But to Kelso, she believes that Keener is dead. She was there when it supposedly happened. So, curiosity piqued, she heads out to follow the trail. And thanks to further found footage, we see Kelso being dragged along in Anna's whimsical hotter and colder game around Lower Manhattan, before finally arriving to an abandoned building, where inside she finds an echo. This echo depicts the first meeting where Keener interacts with Faye, attempting to get her to join their cause. Kelso is beyond bewildered, but within the apartment also finds a shade crate, this being the supposed present that Keener had left for Faye. It claims that it needs two-factor authentication to be opened. Kelso approaches it, but upon touching it is knocked unconscious by a powerful shocking effect. Her status after this point is unknown due to the feed cutting out. But soon thereafter, our agent gets word that Kelso's location has been pinged to the stranded tanker. We arrive to find heavy Black Tusk presence, and overhear on the comms that Natalia has been lured into thinking that Faye Lau is still alive, thanks to Kelso's usage of her watch. And given how we've seen her deal with traitors like Stovepipe and the attempts on Schaefer, she's thrown a lot of resources in attempting to track Faye down. We hear that the countermeasure has been deployed to cut off access from the rogue network, and as we infiltrate the facility, we fight through White Tusk forces, a Marauder quadcopter, True Sons of Reinforcements, even a hunter that's been dispatched, before finally breaking through it all to find the same shade crate sitting conspicuously in the center of the tanker ship, still unopened. Our agent approaches it, lured in by a recording from Kelso asking if we're ready to see how deep the rabbit hole really goes, before we get stunned by the same shocking force. It's at this moment that the big reveal happens and Aaron Keener steps out from the shadows. He first crouches over our body and holds his new Shade Watch close to ours. If you'll recall, we took his watch back when we thought we killed him, so he clones his old profile onto this new watch, and with the presence of his profile along with Faye's that Kelso had, he's finally able to crack the two-factor authentication that the crate had, revealing inside another mobile shade server. He takes it and leaves our unconscious body to head off onto the Manhattan Bridge where he climbs into a van. It's revealed here that Theo Parnell is alive and Kelso herself sits in the driver's seat, and her watch flicks to Rogue as the three of them drive off. This was of course a hugely pivotal moment and reveal, but there are some necessary details dropped in the comms afterwards. For one, we learn that with this mobile shade server, and apparently others that they have, Keener and Theo intend to set up a rogue network that can extend potentially nationwide, using the Statue of Liberty in some way as a signal booster. Keener leaves us a personal message filled with plenty of gloating and ego like his best past self, but ultimately concluding what Faye, Schaefer, and even Kelso came to realize, which is that despite our differences, we share a common enemy, and if we want any chance in taking them down, it's going to take all of us banding together. And one final note to us left by Kelso highlights this as she states that after seeing what we're really up against, it's no longer about who you're affiliated with. Rather, she says she's going to do whatever it takes to pick up from where Faye left off and win this war that we've waded into against Natalia, Cal, and their unending power. Okay, my friends, and with that, I conclude this ultimate story recap on everything you need to know regarding the Sokolova War story arc. I sincerely hope you enjoyed and found this both informational and concise, as those were my two biggest goals. Hopefully now with the stuff we covered here, you're ready to dive into Year 6 and the continuation of the Division 2 story, which is no doubt only going to get crazier and more intense now that we have Keener in the mix. So I, for one, am very excited to see where things are headed. Any questions or thoughts that you may have about anything we covered, as always, leave them down below. I look forward to reading through them and will respond to everything that I can. But that is going to do it for me on this one, everybody. Thank you all so much for watching. I'll see you in the next one. RogueGold.